I think I'm calmer this episode.
You're better this episode? All right.
Well, after because I showered and left my hair wet and it looked kind of cool earlier. This is the second we're filming today, and now it's all dry and
Oh,
frizzy, and I think it just
did you
calmed
not
my
put
brain.
product in it?
What's product?
Oh my gosh.
I do use. I
I
did
need
use
to
that.
send you a product bag.
Oh, don't tease me. I'll use it for every podcast. I did use. My wife got me 3 Minute Miracle.
What's
The
that?
Aussie something. It's conditioner you leave in for 3 minutes.
Oh, yeah. Is that a store-bought thing? Because I don't do store-bought.
Yeah, it's store bought.
Kidding. Being a hair snob. All right, welcome back to the Always Right podcast. I'm author Karisa DeLay.
And I'm Jaime Vendera. I was thinking I'm a hair snob, but okay, yeah.
Well, I'm a hairstylist, so for me, like, I'm like, yeah. I'm going to send you a care package, a hair care package.
Oh, I'm hair care bear. Oh,
All right, today we're going to talk about chapter breaks.
yeah. That's so important.
And it is. It's a topic that sometimes, it can be overwhelming. As I put in here, when you start writing, you're kind of like throwing stuff on the page, and you're what are you looking at?
I'm wanting to go on vacation again because I see that blue water behind you. Last podcast, I was driving down the road with them cars.
Yes, yeah. I changed the scenery behind us.
I love it.
This is paradise here. Yeah. Okay, so whenever you are throwing stuff on the page, like we had the episode a few weeks ago with Jeff Rivera, and he's like speed writing, telling us just get the stuff on there, get the stuff down. But he also gave us the two different types. You got your prancers and your outliners. So if you're an outliner, these are where your chapters kind of break apart. So the key with chapters is essential, and it's different between nonfiction and fiction. So let's tackle nonfiction first.
Okay. So, nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
We both. I haven't read these notes yet, but I will tell you this right off the gate. Well, I did. I read them this morning, but then you rewrote them, and then you know how I've already forgotten it.
Yes.
When I write nonfiction books, because you think like chapters like we talked about this, Chrissy. We're talking about an author who wrote like 3-page chapter, and the next one was 51 pages, and then the third chapter was this. When I'm doing a nonfiction book, it may not. I try to keep them pretty much the same, but
Drink water.
It may not be that. But I think of key points like if I'm giving a workshop, like for Raise Your Voice, it was my introduction. Here's how you do breathing. Here's breath support. Here's placement. Here's your vocal warm-ups. Here's an exercise. So in that context, even though let's say roughly I'm trying to keep each chapter 10 pages, it may not work out that way for me. I may have to have subsections. Like if I'm like, man, this chapter is going to be 30 pages long, everything else is 10, then I may try to break it and find a relevant point to break it to keep it pretty much the same. But if you go into Raise Your Voice, yes, there may be a chapter that's 20 pages long, and the next one's 28 pages long. So I think we have a little more leeway with that. I may be wrong because you may have different notes on that, but that's just my organic way of approaching a nonfiction book.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, chapters, think of chapters almost like if you had like a legal document, where legal documents don't necessarily have a chapter, but they have sections that break apart. Like this section's talking about this section. So in nonfiction, I personally suggest keeping your mind kind of your ideas separated by chapters and not putting too many ideas in one chapter.
Yep.
So yeah, there could be more chapters than you originally thought you set out to do. But it's good to keep your readers focused and on your line of thought and not overly confuse them. So like, I know when I'm going through a course book in school, and this is kind of like one of the physics class I had started to take, it became a challenge because the professor was asking us questions in chapters that we had not even read. And we're like, wait a minute, this is not even in here. And he's like, yeah, I just can't take it out. And we're like, okay, so we have to get a question wrong because we've not even like read over this stuff. So you have to kind of keep it inside that chapter and keep it organized so you can see, okay, this chapter is discussing this chapter is discussing this. Not that you can't overlap and talk about multiple things in each chapter, but use a specific chapter to focus on that content.
Well, it's also, I love that you said that because it's building blocks, it's skill sets. So for him to do that, you haven't reached that building block or skill set. Now, if I get
Mm-hmm.
farther in a book that's kind of laid out an outline for subject matter, and maybe I've taught breathing basics, like you don't raise your shoulders, you got to let your diaphragm expand, your belly, back, and ribs pop out. Now, I may mention that again when I'm talking about how do you sing with rasp, and you add something that I'm like, hey, you got to
Mm-hmm.
do this and that. I can refer back to that because they've already been taught that skill set or that building block. But
Right.
so you have to really think about the organization. Like, how can you build to the end points?
Well, and that's what I did. And when I was writing my creative nonfiction, before the world was lost, and some of the things that you go from writing fiction to nonfiction, you have to understand is you can't show not tell type, or show don't tell type situation. You have to tell. You have to explain. You have to not leave your reader wondering, because that's the whole point of it, is you're educating them. Um, so when I did that, I did as again as a building of a concept, so my reader would understand the concepts before I threw them into like the big picture. Like, this is what I'm trying to tell you, but before I get to this, I kind of need to tell you how we got there. I need to kind of get you to that point. And so those are where your chapters come in. Your chapters come in when you're building these points. Separate the points out and make them each a chapter. Um, so I put out here kind of like when you're building these subject chapters, you kind of need to answer certain things. You don't have to do it in this particular order. However, maybe inform. You need to do your information, your problem, and your solution. Kind of like give the information that's going towards what you're talking about. Give us the problem, and then give us the solution. Maybe that should be a certain order as far as when you're setting it out. But you can have several chapters about the information, several chapters about the problem, and several chapters about the solution. Um, but I put a little list here. As far as what you should do when you're thinking about nonfiction chapter layout. And you need to, one, what is it? Like, what is it that this
What's your
book's going to
subject?
do? Right. So basically, that's where your introduction comes in. Like, what are you about to tackle? Tell me what this is. So give me a broad summary synopsis about what you're about to go over in your nonfiction. Why should we care? Like, is this is a personal issue, or is it something that millions of people are facing, or is this something that you just feel that this is something that it's not been talked about? Like, why are we reading this? Give me a reason to read this.
I think a lot of nonfiction authors miss this point too, because why are you reading a nonfiction book? I really want to learn about the subject, so you need to speak to them because they know, they're dealing with problems with this, which that's down the line. But
Right.
if you speak to them and like, this is why you should care because I know you're struggling with it. I did it. I'm going to tell you the solution by the end of this book. You're going to hook them. You're going to pull them into your
Right.
writing. So
Well, and it's kind of like you've written several music, voice oriented books. Why should I read this one particularly? Give me a reason why. What is the draw for this one? So make sure you include that. How are we going to view it? This is kind of referring to like the personal tackling of it versus like maybe the academic tackling of it. How are we tackling this subject? Um,
you should look at
so
who your audience is going to be then.
Yes. Yes. Is this based on my opinion? Is this based on years of research? Is this also going to include like what the data says? So how are you approaching this topic? Like, how are we going to view it? Um, our approach, uh, our approach to solving. If this is going to be a resource type book, you need to kind of put that out there as well. Like, is this something that's going to be like textbook oriented? Like, are you writing something that's because a lot of times in my ASU classes, I will have a book, like an actual book that has been written, not a fiction, but a nonfiction book about a timeline. That's not a textbook. It's just a book written about that timeline. But the people that are writing this book have done extensive research. So it doesn't give you like the research aspect of it. It gives you the overview of what's happened. It's giving you the history, but you can utilize it and you can cite those books. So what essentially are you tackling to solve? Like, how are you solving this? What way are you going to approach and
I could
solve?
literally see Before the World Was Lost being an addenda book that they would pick up and refer to in college. I had some people say, Raise Your Voice should be in college, should be a college textbook.
Mhm.
Absolutely not. because the way I wrote it, even like I've even had people say he doesn't really know anatomy, because like the chords, like if I'm in falsetto, it's like the upper edges are touching and the full voice, they're all the way together. I have illustrations, they're not really based that way because I don't want to get over technical. I don't want to approach it like that. I don't want to have to cite references and studies. I was speaking to the average kid or, adult who wants to sing in a rock band. And so I had to explain to the person
You're
like
creating
this.
a visual aspect to
Yeah,
that
and
person.
it wasn't set up for a college textbook. And listen, I'm not knocking. I've read some singing books for college, and I got to say, I'm not saying I'm not bragging on my book. I'm not saying that at all. But I have read some really bad college textbooks on vocalizing that
Well,
don't really
do you,
apply, but they are in that realm.
I was gonna
They're,
say, do you think it's because they're in that realm they have to stay within the parameters of
yeah,
what? Yeah.
yeah. So, and I've even had like Dr. Denzogo, he'll laugh at you like Jaime Vendera, the coach that knows too much, because a lot of stuff about, acoustics and anatomy. Not that I use it in teaching. I don't think it's necessary, but, and I don't write my books that way. So, but if I had to be in that realm, yes, I would have had to change gears. I'd have to rewrite the book completely. I'd have to cite references. So who is your audience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. So something else that a lot of people steer clear of when they're writing is past failures, like where research has gone wrong or where you failed in your research, and that it's okay to be like when you're writing nonfiction to show what went wrong. So when people are thinking, well, did they think of this? Yeah, we thought of this, and this isn't the way it works, or not necessarily a failure, but thought processes that you thought were a thing and weren't that thing. Like it's okay to add those in there and even create a whole chapter of where we thought this was going. And then you put all that out there, and then it's like at the end, but this is not how it ended up. And then go into maybe your solutions or your conclusion of what is the finality of your writing.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned past failures because I just think it makes you more human. I would love
Mhm.
when I read a nonfiction book, or like, look, this is what I tried for 3 years and it didn't work. I was
Mhm.
originally taught that to sing higher notes, your chords, they connect in the front and they open in the back. I was taught that they zip up from the back to the front to get tinier and tinier. Um, I actually use that as a visual. I even say in the book, I'm like, look, we haven't really proven that this is true. A lot of people
Mhm.
say it happens at the first break or the second break or when you're a whistle voice, but that is kind of a past failure because it was like set in stone back in the 80s and 90s. This is what happens. And, scientists came along and said, nope, that's not true. But it's okay to mention that because it's growth and it shows your reader like, hey, this is where I was. You probably are there. Look where I'm heading now. So,
Yes. I did that and before the world was lost, I put in theories because a lot of times when you're creating a new potential theory, people are like, oh, but it's this way. Yes, but let's actually look at that one. Let's look and see, is this actually the way it is? Because there's new evidence showing that it could potentially not be that. So I did put that out there. I think I put that out there when it came to the core, the theories of what the core of the earth is like. I did that with a theory of carbon dating because I do believe carbon dating to be a real thing, but I also believe that sometimes it can be skewed. So I explained how I feel like the skewing could be a potential thing, even put diagrams in there. So you're looking at the current data that's not a law. You're looking at the current things and what is being believed. If you're trying to change that belief, you have to show this is where it is potentially flawed or, it's failing to explain. But these are all chapters. These are all things that create the expounding of your chapter. You could be like, okay, these are the problems. But the key is when you're starting each of these chapters, you must open your chapter, create a basic thesis of what you're about to cover in each one of those. This is nonfiction, of course. You don't want a thesis for your fiction. That'd be really weird. But creating that fiction or that nonfiction thesis to tell the reader what you're about to cover in that chapter. You don't necessarily have to do a final conclusion at each chapter, but you do want to kind of do a little bit. Okay, now that we've said this, let's move on to the next part of this, and let's build from that point and move on. So it's like each little thing is its own little paper that you're putting in together. But I don't know. That's just me.
you wrote great notes.
I thank you for those compliments. All right, let's move on to fiction chapters. Unless you have anything you want to add to nonfiction chapters,
No, that's good.
because
Um,
yeah.
Fiction
Nonfiction's kind of
chapters was much easier for me because I had
yeah,
Daniel Middleton, honestly.
yeah, and I think that's the part where it's a little bit more tricky. I think nonfiction chapters are a little easier, where fiction is, yeah, the writing a book may seem overwhelming, and you've got all this information, like we've talked. You're just putting it all on paper. You know, you didn't create an outline. So if you're creating an outline, it might be a little easier for you because your outline is essentially your chapters. You're outlining, okay, want this to happen, this to happen, this to happen. Those are going to be your chapters.
Yeah,
Um,
I bullet point everything, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. So,
Yeah, but
but again,
you
with
claimed when we were talking to, but at the same time, you claimed when we talked to Jeff that you are a prancer. So for
I
you,
am,
you prance along,
I have an overall view. He's
right?
talking about like very
They
very
finish,
detailed.
yeah.
I have, but like Pim gets caught in jail, and then they
Hmm.
did this, and so I have 3 or 4 ideas just to structure it because, especially with fiction, and I know a lot of people will do it. They'll switch scenes from section to section. You know, these characters, these characters. I do that sometimes too. But the way we structured it with 7-Eleven presses in the beginning, we had a word count. It's like we don't want to go over 5,000 words. I might write around that. Rich is allowed to edit it, and if he edited it down to 4,500, it is what it is. We didn't care, but we stayed within that realm. And then as time went on, I was like, you know, we're getting so tight at this. I'll just do 4,000 words. So I would have an overall kind of idea. Never knew where the writing was going to take me. You know, I had
Hmm.
kind of a picture, but so I love writing like that. I'm like, oh, never thought about that. It just pops up in my mind, and I go with it like that. So yeah, I'm not like very detailed. So I apologize for that. When I do nonfiction, yeah, I mean it's like, oh, I'm going to give a workshop, so I have to have 20 bullet points for every chapter. Fiction maybe 3 to 5. You
Yeah.
know.
And here's the thing. Your chapters are going to serve as kind of like dividers. They're going to be scene changes, they're going to be time changes, maybe character changes, location changes, etc. They're going to be the pacing. They're going to set that pace of your book. So, with that said, let's talk about that. Let's talk about setting the scene. When you're starting a chapter, let's talk about how to start these chapters.
Okay.
So,
I start them like it's on a cliffhanger. Like I always gotta come right out the gate. Like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that.
okay, but do you start your okay, so you're just out the gate. You don't set the scene as far as
Oh
like
yeah, yeah, yeah. In the beginning of the book, you know, I try
Mhm.
like even in Sigil, the first chapter was pretty intense because I'm like there are 4 main characters and I had to give their backstory. So like the first one was Pim the Knife, and he's like, it was still starts with a lot of energy. It's like he's like out of breath and he's hiding on a rooftop, and there's these knights coming through, and he's like, "Woo, almost got busted." Da 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 da
Mhm.
da, and then they find him when he falls asleep. So I do set up the scene. I show like the surroundings. I explain what the character looks like to a point. You know,
Mhm.
with my books, even though we've marketed and used some pictures that we've used for like characters in books, I try to leave it up to the imagination of the person to let them see what they would look like in their mind.
Well,
Um,
yeah, but your books are smaller and they're not meant to have a lot of over descriptions. They're just straight to the point, straight to the action.
yep,
I mean, you want to build a world, obviously, because you have this new map that's coming out with
I do.
Age of the Sigil. It looks pretty
Ah,
awesome.
yes. I'm like, Daniel, Daniel will be on here soon. He did the map. We had the old map. I'm gonna have to put this on Instagram. And I loved it, you know, but it was very basic, rudimentary. We done it 15 years ago or so. And he made a new one. I said, you have free reign, but I'm like, here's the old map. And like, I'm very detailed. If I'm building a world, like how many days it takes to get from this point to this point, where on the continent is it? It's in the Northeast. Is there water? No, there's only one lake. And he redrew this map. I'm throwing him under the bus. It looked nothing like it. I'm like, dude, this is brilliant. Can't use it. What? I'm like, dude, it ain't even nothing like what we did. But we got to talking, and he's like, oh, I thought you meant free reign. I thought you were going to rewrite it. I'm like, if I have to rewrite that, I'll have to gut the whole 3 books.
Right. It'd be easier to
So
fix the map.
yeah, but I mean, we're real creative together. He's like, well, maybe you could use this for something else. I'm like, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, yeah, I can. I can use it for Spitfire because I've only written 2 books in that. And I'm like, I'm already seeing the places that are in Spitfire 1 and 2 where I can put them on that map. So I'm like, strip it off, I'll tell you where to put the first couple kingdoms, and then I'll let you put whatever. I'll just give you a bunch of names, and you put them wherever you want. I do not care. Then I'll write the book to that. So, but for me, visually, it does. It helps to have that map. So
Yeah.
it kind of guides me, and then I can be visual, like, oh, they're going through the mountains. Ooh, it's desert swamps. You know,
Yeah.
now they're in the ocean. So, yeah.
Well, and so that's great for doing those smaller chapter books, those quick reads, the small novellas and things like that. So that, yes, you don't have to be as descriptive as, detailed in the stuff, but starting a story, you definitely want to make sure where the action's taking place. Where's the story about to take place? You can begin with the bigger picture, like I like to do, which I focus on smaller details. Like when you're going into the room, I may focus on I want the room to feel cold. So I want my reader to feel cold. What are you doing?
I'm listening. Go ahead. I'm looking for books because I'm just thought of something. But no,
Okay.
me, I probably gave it away. So go ahead.
No, so for example, I might describe like the dripping of the water from a leaky faucet. And the thing is, that's telling you that the room is so quiet, you can hear the dripping of the water. Or you might hear like the clickety clack of someone's shoes, which means it might be a very barren room that's going to echo a lot. So there's little things that your reader is going to like, oh yeah, this is echoing. I can feel a room that's so open that you're hearing the clickety
Yeah.
clack. The smell of coffee. You can describe the smell of coffee and the whispers of people talking to kind of open the reader in that you're in a breakfast cafe. You know what I mean? There's different things you can do in the beginning to set the stage of each, you know,
Yeah.
chapter. And you don't
No.
have to do that as you get along because once you've set the stage for an apartment, for your characters or a certain thing like that, you don't have to keep going back and re-describing. You may just add a smaller description. Don't describe it all at once. I know for me, what I typically do will give like little hints to the space that I'm in and a little hint to the character, but later down the road I might remind in another chapter about something. So you don't have to just like throw it all right there and then be like, oh, this is so wordy. I have to get through the details of where I'm at before I even get to the dialogue. And then, you've lost your reader. You've lost that whole flow.
Yeah, since like the books I write, the movie books are so thin. They're only like 100 pages or so.
Mm-hmm.
I typically end up doing like a prologue, kind of like for the Werecat series with like Farrell and these type books. I had to write a couple pages explaining like it's in 50 years from now, and there's been this final cataclysm, and there's hardly any people left on Earth, and this is what happened. So when I do roll into the scene of the first book, and we're in New York, and this little girl Pippa Ray's is walking out when really she shouldn't be, because the dangers that are out there. They're already set and prepped. And like, okay, why would she be worried being out at night? It's just New York City. Everyone's out. No, there's nobody. There's no lights. There's danger left and right. But you already know that from the prologue. You don't have to do that. Like with Four Rivers or something, you're already building, and you have a lot more detail. And even back when we came together, and I wanted you to split Crystal Gate into 3 books, that was my mentality. And if
Mm-hmm.
we had done that, I agree with you. I'm glad you didn't do that, because it'd been like, yeah, we have to rewrite a lot of this and have a prologue and set the
Mm-hmm.
scene, because by the end of that third of a book, they're gonna be like, what did I just read?
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that's missing.
Yeah.
So it really depends on how you're writing this too. You
Yeah,
know?
and see I write the bigger books. So for me, I need to provide like strong sensory parts to my chapters to create the scene. Whereas yours are a little smaller and you can sprinkle them throughout your book and you can provide maybe new information about your world that you're building at different stages in your book and different chapters. But that's essentially what you're doing with your chapters is you're creating new scenes or change of perspective. And I've heard before, and I've not tried this, but I've thought about it in Canvas is it's very challenging to have different perspective to have like an omniscient and then a first person. It's
Yeah.
very hard to do that. But I think you could do that where you have the majority of the book be omniscient and have a sprinkling of chapters that are specifically to a certain character and what they're seeing.
Yep. I haven't done
So,
that either, but I do like switching first person, third person. I do that with the prologues.
mm,
and that's the only time I've ever experimented with that.
Well, and I think spoke with Willow with her books and talked to her about doing that, where she started her prologue from a certain point of view and then takes the rest of the books in a different perspective. But anytime that switches, that it needs to maybe be italicized or
Yep,
something that you're letting the
that's
reader
what I do.
know. Yeah, yeah.
I actually picked that up from Terry Brooks, my
Okay.
favorite fantasy author.
So something I wrote here in the notes about start where the action is. When starting a new chapter, it's best to steer clear of that excessive play by play, especially in the first chapter. Instead, opt to do the whole, like we've mentioned multiple times, show don't tell technique to create more of an engaging experience for your readers. So you want to draw them in, but you don't want to overly draw them in to where they're bored. So there's like a fine line.
Now, if I'm doing I mean, I start a lot with action scenes, but they're quick, you
Mhm.
know. And then because I will cut to other characters in one chapter if I have to, you know. Typically, I try to keep the chapter switching between characters to kind of throw people off. Like, wait a minute, I didn't get enough with these two people, and now you're on to these two people. Oh, I don't want to read this, and they get into that, and they're like, wait, and then you're back to the other people, like, what? So that's
So
like a
yeah. I like to do that. So with Canvas especially, um I have the very first chapter, you have this character, you're kind of from it's omniscient, but you're seeing it through from her perspective of what she's seeing, what she's feeling. And then there's this presence in the room that she's like, well, who is this? What blah blah blah. The chapter itself is short because I'm leading you on this whole it's warm, it's the sun is rising, I'm making you feel like, oh, this is good. Oh, good morning, Cleveland, all these things. And all of a sudden, like that, it's instant. She's feeling the dread. She can't move. Like someone's in the room. How did this person get there? Oh my gosh. And then she sees these pictures and then she's realizing, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. And
yeah.
the chapter, and then she's like, this split second, she gets a glimpse of the killer, says the killer's name, and it's done. And then it's like, you're like, what? Who is this person? And every person I've given this chapter to, they're like, okay, I need to know what this person does. Who's this person? What's going on? And I'm like, so I've got you like, okay, I need to know who this is. Now I fast forward 10 years later. And you're like, oh my gosh, okay. And I changed the pace. I changed the pace to more of a soft, like to a couple. And you're like, okay, I like to have that roller coaster
I do
for
too.
my readers. And so you can do that. You don't have to have every chapter doesn't have to be action, 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 fighting, or killing, or what, or erotica, whatever you're doing.
I feel like it gets an emotional, a momentary emotional anger response.
A
Like
what?
they're pissed at you because what do you mean? I'm so hooked into this, and you're switching to this.
Yeah.
But then a really good author, and I see this, you start reading that next chapter, and you're mad. I got to get through this, but then you're hooked again, and then
Because
you're
then
switching.
that's the thing. When you throw that chapter in there, that's not quite as action packed. There's something in that chapter that they have to bite onto.
Yep.
You're setting a stage for new characters, but there has to be something in there. I feel like a little bit that you're like, oh, that's intriguing. Okay, what does that connect to? And they got a hold of that. Now they've got two chapters they're holding on to because now they have to find out what's happening in this first chapter. But now you got this little side thing like, okay, but where does that fit in?
Exactly. Or
Yeah.
you may not even, the reader may not even catch it. And then they're like 10 chapters of the book, are like, wait a
Oh,
minute.
man.
I understand now why that red scarf was sitting on the table.
Yes, I was just sitting there thinking, oh yes, because there's a part in the book that I'm writing that I'm like, I have the character doing something and the other character doing something and like picking up something, and you don't realize at the time, you won't realize for a while why they were doing that, and why when they pick that up, they're like, yeah, you're just not even going to be like you're just thinking it's a normal action until you're like, oh my gosh, yes, in the very beginning. I always provide the answers in the beginning, and you don't know it. It's always there.
Yeah. So
It's like
yeah,
a Tarantino.
yeah, breaks are important. I mean, if you really plot out your book and think about this and pepper it back and forth, you're gonna pull them in, you're gonna make them angry, but it's gonna keep them reading. and then
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be so elated when they figure it out, or that maybe they won't. They get to the end of the book, they're like, oh, why didn't I realize that? It was in my face all along,
Mm-hmm.
300 pages ago. Oh, she's so
Well,
brilliant with
that's
this.
yes, that's exactly how that was the feedback I got from Crystal Gate. Now, again, I've contemplated going back and
Dude,
doing a
no.
second edition. We've talked about this, and then putting out that third book after I'm done with Canvas and after I'm done with something else. But when I wrote the first one, I wanted my readers to feel a certain way. I wanted them to feel like I was leading them on this path and this path, and I wanted them to choose. I wanted them to choose path B because I didn't want them to see path A as the actual option um, of who someone was. And so what I did was when I was writing this, I did both people had a balance of who their personality was, as far as like, and my friend from Idaho, he's like, I did not see that coming. And that's what freaked me out. He's like, I did not. He's like, you made me think this, which threw me off. And then I definitely thought this, but then I was like, no. And so you want them to have that feeling. So when I sent out this first chapter of Canvas, I wanted to make sure that I was, because this wasn't my genre, I wanted to make sure that I was eliciting like a certain feeling with my people, and every person, including my youngest daughter who read it, was like, "Oh my gosh, I need more of this because I need to know what's happening here." So I got that from my husband, I got that from friends, I got that from different people, and I'm like, "Okay, I'm on the right track." And as an author, when you give sample chapters out like that are you're wanting to elicit these feelings, and you're getting that back, it keeps you motivated to keep writing. But that's just me. Why are you being so quiet?
Because I think the water's finally calmed me down.
Oh,
No, I was just pulled in. I was like, yeah, you're on a roll. This
yeah.
is good.
Okay, so one of the things I have in the notes, before you allow yourself to become engulfed in all this excitement, it is crucial to remember that the quality of action in the scene isn't solely determined by the action itself. Instead, it hinges on the character's involvement. It kind of like teeters on. Um, it's like you're still getting a storyline line. The repercussions of their actions. Like if they do this, oh my gosh, this is what's going to happen. You got to keep your reader feeling like, oh my gosh, if they do this, this is not going to be good. So it's not just putting the action in there. There has to be some kind of mental insertion of your reader into what's happening, and then they want to feel for the character and the decisions that they're making. For example, I put in here, if there's a fight, um, do we need to care about who is going to win or what happens if they do? Like if so and so wins, it's kind of like when you're watching a movie. Like, oh my gosh, whenever you're watching something, like if this actually turns out this way, it's going to turn out probably great, but in the moment, you still have to be like, oh my gosh, if this goes wrong, you have to keep your reader on that pace of questioning, if this goes sideways, what's the outcome? What's the next chapter going to be? You know what I mean? Kind of like we always refer to Game of Thrones. And I feel like Game of Thrones is a perfect example of how the audience was expecting it to go a certain way, and it did not go any of the ways we thought it did.
No, and you were emotionally so pulled in.
Oh my gosh, so drawn in. Like everybody's like, and then when it went the other way, that's why we were let down, was because emotionally we had already planned out so many different avenues that it could have gone. We seen certain characters that were having relations on the ship, and we're like, oh, maybe they're pregnant. Maybe this is going to be a question of who is the rightful heir. Like all these things are going in our head, and then when you're given none of the things that you've led us to, it's like, okay, what was the point of that? What was the point of all that action? Because none of it came to fruition of where it should have went. So knowing the repercussions for their actions, make sure you keep those things in your chapter. Keep that building in your chapter. Something I listed, and this is good. How you start your chapter with specific verb interests, like interesting sounds. Like I do this like in Canvas, and I've said this before on an earlier episode, where one of the you don't have to start it with you don't have to start it with we are back, like you don't have to start it in a certain way that just makes it seem like you're forming a sentence. But one of my chapters starts out 21 miles from blah blah, and I just kind of go in. And the 21 for me is 21 Pilots, of course,
Yep.
because they're one of my favorite bands. But I started out 21 miles or 21 blocks from downtown, sets this cottage style home, however I worded that. So it's interesting to when you pull someone in just by your first line using unique verbs. That I got sneeze.
Bless you.
I think I started the sneeze in last episode.
I think so too.
And it just came to pass.
Because I was going to make a dumb comment, like we said something about meth. I was like, Coke, but
Oh my gosh, people are gonna think that we're like doing drugs on the side as much as you talk about the cocaine.
You done prove I got teeth.
Well, that's
Or,
meth.
yes.
I don't know if cocaine does anything to your teeth.
They might think that. I've been accused of that. God's my witness, I've never done cocaine. I've been accused several times. One of my workers, one of my foremen, and a friend of mine who I play music with, his sister, they both said, Jamie, are you on cocaine? I said, why would you ever think that? They said, because you're the most hyper person I ever met, and your nose is always red. And I...
Oh. But your skin itself is always red because of your skin
I'm
disorder.
like, look, it's my skin disease. I'm always like that.
Yes.
So, and I'm super hyper, so.
That's funny. So I put on here some verbs, like if you're using walk or jump, you could do instead stroll or leap. Little things like that, little words that could be utilized differently than just basically I walked into the room and the wall was white. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and one thing I do want to say with your chapter breaks too, like the way we're describing, like if you're switching points, that is great. If you're writing and the next chapter is an immediate continuation of what you're already doing, and you took 2 chapters, so some of your chapters are 20 pages apiece, but now you got 2 chapters and they're 40 pages, but they're the same thing. Don't do that. Either flip-flop and move it ahead, or condense it and work it so you get your point across in that chapter.
Change the point of view. So like if your first chapter you're writing, if the first part of the chapter is looking from the street inward to the scene, and then it's the same scene, but now you're inside a room, just change the perspective. Don't go inside the room in the first chapter. Go inside the room in the second chapter. You can jump into a time slot and a location by changing chapters, but keep the same characters, keep the same conversation going on, or whatever. But don't do that.
Because to me, that's like we said before, we've read somewhere a person will have 10 pages, 37 pages, 8 pages. That's almost that situation, but you just decided to split it and make it. So change the scene, change the view, move it to the chapter after that. So you move to the next part of the book. So you're throwing it back and forth like we like to do. Just don't make it a continuation. Or like, what? This doesn't even make any sense.
And this is something I'm doing in this particular book now, is a lot of the basic chapters that I'm writing are about the same. My average chapter is like 8 pages. But I do have random chapters that are only a page long. I've even shortened them to keep them a page long because these are the killer. This is the actions of the killer. So whenever it's the action of the killer, I keep it very short, very dark, not a lot of information other than what they're doing, what they're looking at. And then I move on. I don't create dialogue. I don't do anything. So that is a specific style to that character. And I'm keeping that consistent. Like when you see that short chapter, this is the perspective of the killer.
Yeah, but that makes sense.
Right.
And
that's
intentional.
Right. You could do that. But I mean, we've talked about a book that I read from an author I met and I wanted to support, but she had 30 pages for one chapter. And it spanned so many months of what was happening from a baseball game to a hospital visit to getting married to buying a haunted house and the stepdaughter, and you're in the Halloween store, and then the very next paragraph you're having Thanksgiving dinner. All these things are happening in the first chapter.
But that's word vomits and not following through and actually editing.
Yeah, and I think that her story would have been better had she expounded on some of these things. So it was like an overly exaggerated outline. So I feel like if she redid that, it would be great if she would have just kind of broke up the chapters and went further on them. But I also get it was her first book. And a lot of times your first book, you just want to get it out there, but maybe
Yep.
that's going to screw you in the end.
Yep. No, I feel the same. I mean, everybody loves Raise Your Voice. And I'm like,
You're like, I'm so over my
I
book.
need to give it to Rich and Daniel and just say,
Please
redo
edit
this whole
this.
thing. Yes. Yes, that and the ultimate breathing workout. Everything else, thankfully, Rich has touched. So,
Okay, something real quickly, and this is a key point when you're starting your chapters, is make sure when you start your chapter it actually sets the scene. So create words that actually are fitting to the scene and the timeline and the character. So if your character is an adult, you don't want to use words that make it seem like they're young. Use words that are a little bit more mature. Um, well, I mean,
no, I agree because
yeah, you don't want to use descriptive words unless someone is very like a very tiny, you know, shy person. Use words that relate to being shy. Use words that if this is a scene where it's bright, use words that you'd feel as being bright. So color choices. There's so many words you can use for different color choices. You can go in and actually Google different words for yellow. When you read those words, well, how does that word make you feel about yellow? Is that a bright word? Is that a word that makes you feel like it's like sickening? Like if you think of jaundice, think of a color of like the jaundice of the, whatever, that's like a sickly feeling. So use words that associate with what you're trying to set for your reader in the beginning of that chapter.
and I tried to hang on to those words like crisis artifact. I can't remember Lionel Galton. He's an older guy who was a spy. I kind of think of W.C. Fields, and nobody on here is going to remember who that is, except way back when. But he would use this word like, that guy's so cantankerous. And
Yes, you've said that before in previous episodes where you've cantankerous.
Yeah, and you wouldn't hear, one of the kids in Order of Five using that. They'd be like Coolio, they would do something bad like that, or cool, but they would be like cantankerous. So
Right.
you got to make sure
Yeah.
it fits the character.
Well, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, definitely thinking character, but I'm also thinking about setting the scene when you do that opening chapter. When I'm doing a dark chapter for the killer, I'm not using words that are cheerful. I'm using words that are suspicious and words that are more alluring to the scene, like picking out the shadows that are against the wall. So I'm focusing on the dark side of it versus the bright side. Oh, the beautiful sun hit the edge of the unless I want my character in the very beginning to think it's happy, and then I switch it.
Well, you're doing something that a lot of new authors miss. You're instilling emotions within your writing. So like you do it in the first chapter of Canvas, she wakes up and like, wow, what a beautiful day. And you're like, oh, this is so awesome. Wait a minute, I'm going to die. And you watch your emotions change. You're like, what? And you'll feel it. You want to make your you want to make your reader feel the book.
I'm going to send this to you because you've not read this. I'm going to send you the first chapter and you can tell me what you think. So I'll send it to you today.
Okay.
All right, to sum up this, I wanted to go over changing point of view. We briefly talked about it just a couple seconds ago, but like when you are kind of stuck with your POV and you're writing from an omniscient point of view, it's good to consider switching and changing your character. You don't have to do it only from one person, which unless that's what your book is. And your book is completely from one point of view, which Stephanie Meyer did that with Twilight. She was basically from Bella's point of view. There were a few books that it switched around, but she let you know ahead of time, this is from so-and-so's point of view. Like, you're switching because maybe Bella wasn't available or the scene changed or whatever. So switch the point of view to kind of change up the focus, because sometimes you miss points of the description. You miss certain things because your character can't see everything. There's no way your character can see everything. Your character's maybe not going to notice all the detail. So it is nice to kind of like change a perception or perspective from your writing to be able to gather some of the other outside clues to help your reader follow along.
Yeah, I don't even think I really stick with one character's point of view. I think I guess I get bored with it. And I like to build like at least 4 to 6 main characters, and also even in different chapters. Maybe one gets lost and they're by themselves, and I switch that point of view and focus on them. Or maybe they're upset with the rest of the gang, so you need to see their point of view, because if it was from someone who's happy and is kind of aloof to it, you might not catch what I'm trying to get you to feel in that chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's I was trying to say earlier was think in realistically point of view. When you're writing a character, your character one may not see everything. Your character is not gonna oh, what did I write here? They're not going to be able to introduce new possibilities of the story because they're only going to have one viewpoint. So it's nice to have different reactions, which can lead to like a whole new idea for your reader to kind of take them off if you want to lead them a different way. But if you have one point of view, it may only lead them one way, and every chapter is going to be the same unless it's just a personal story. Now some people can do that very well, like Catherine Horsley. She does that with her character because her character is her point of view, but she sprinkles in all these other things that are happening. So you get a better storyline. So you can do it. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying, suggesting that if you feel like you're getting bored with your point of view, that would be when, if you have nothing creative to add for your point of view, that's when maybe you want to switch your point of view of the chapter. I wasn't saying you have to do that all the time. There was one more thing I wanted to add. Oh, how not to start a chapter. Oh my gosh,
How's how not to start a chapter?
you're funny. I'm gonna grab my phone here because I can't read these notes real quick.
You can read them in the video. You can hold them up real close. There you go. What kind of phone do you have? What do you have?
I have a 15.
Okay, I forgot it does have 4 lenses on it.
Yeah, it's a 15 Pro.
Or 5 or whatever it is.
Let's see.
What? Mine ain't the same as yours.
5. I have 5 camera thingies on there.
I got the I got the Pro Max. Maybe that's why it's a little different.
Mine's a Pro Max.
Okay, hold yours up again.
They're exactly the same.
No, they're not. See my little camera thingy? It's on the top. Yours is on the bottom.
No, look, I have that right there.
Oh, do you have a lens cover over it? Oh, okay, I see it. Never mind.
Okay.
It just looked like the bottom one really stuck out. All right. Back to your point of view.
All right. Okay, so how not to start a chapter. Oh my gosh, here. Where am I at? Okay. It's tempting to think of a character in the same way you would think of a typical day. So it's you wake up and you go to sleep. This is something that I feel needs to be tackled when stories run on. Be careful thinking that every chapter has to be the next minute. Unless you're writing Gone in 60 Seconds, or you're writing something that is a minute by minute. Like if the book is called 24 minutes, then there's 24 chapters that cover each minute. That's different. But when you're writing a storyline, it doesn't have to be, every chapter doesn't have to be the very next minute. It doesn't have to be the very next day. It doesn't have to be, oh, I woke up today and this is what's happening. It does not have to be like that. So you can think that when chapters change, times can change. You can fast forward several, hours. I have where the police are at the crime scene early in the morning, and then another chapter in between, but then it fast forwards several hours and now it's sunset and this cop has been here all day and like nothing's really happening, and he's sitting at his desk watching the sunset over the Lake Erie. So you don't have to do a minute by minute unless that's what your book's about.
No,
So
I mean, like even you said, you jumped 10 years ahead and canvassed, and there's been times, like even in Sigil, where weeks have gone by, or the next chapter, like, oh my gosh, we've been walking for 4 days. Are we ever going to reach the ocean? So it doesn't have to be. It's not a play-by-play. It's what is relevant to the story to keep it moving.
Yeah. So in a sense, to summarize, basically what we're saying is you need to treat each chapter like its own story. You have a beginning, middle, and end. You have a setting, you have actions, and you're going to have like sensory things, you're going to have emotions, you're going to have all these things taking place within that chapter based on, what you're trying to set. So kind of keep that in its own little world. Like, what feeling am I wanting to, and you put this in when you're writing your outline. What feeling do I want to create here? So drink your water. I feel like it's like
the 15th time.
Yeah, I feel like it's the little waffle maker at the Hampton Inn or whatever that you flip. Beep, beep. Okay, flip your waffle now.
So this is a lot to unpack and really think about, authors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's important because your chapter is what takes them in. It brings your readers in. It keeps your readers engaged. It keeps your readers wanting to turn the page to the next chapter. So it is essential to remember some of these key points and treat them like individual books themselves and how you're doing that. So,
one last tip I'll give.
yes.
This is just the way I do it. It may not be for you, but you see on Kindle now, everyone's writing short books. The way I do write fiction is I'll binge watch any sci-fi or comedy or whatever. So if I was writing a comedy book series, I may watch Friends, and it's only 20 minutes long, and there are scene changes in that chapter before I'd move on. And that would be like an episode for me would be a chapter where a chapter break would be. I'm watching this sci-fi show called Sanctuary now, and that's like 45, 50 minutes long. So that would be a bigger chapter like Order 5 or Age of the Sigil. And I look at that and how those scenes change. But then when I write that big of a book, it's a story change. It's all flowing together, but every chapter in a TV book like Age of the Sigil, Order 5 is a new like a new TV show. Like, oh, this is episode 2, this is episode 3. But that's only if you write in my style, so,
Right.
But it could still be effective. You could watch like, oh, I see how, I love How I Met Your Mother or whatever the show is. I love, Living Color, whatever it is that you're watching. Like, oh, I see how they've changed. I could apply that to how I do my chapter breaks.
Mm-hmm.
So, pay attention to how your favorite authors do this. You can study these styles and be like, okay, I see what they're doing. So that's...
I feel like that's me. I feel like I write like Dan Brown when it comes to changing sceneries and character positions and perspectives and stuff like that. I like the way Dan Brown writes short chapters.
Yep.
But he keeps the story going. You can keep changing locations. I like that, and that's how I write. I feel like he's kind of my inspiration for writing style.
So learn from your favorite authors.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, this has been a great episode. Hopefully this is informative for you. Hopefully you learned something and you can take this and apply it to your writing. So if you'd like to know how to follow us for more, you can go to alwayswritepodcast.com and you can click on the little icons. You can follow us on our social media. You can also follow us on our YouTube channel, subscribe there. You can listen to us on Apple Music, Spotify, and Amazon Music as well. Also, if you have a question, or if you have something that you would like to reach out and suggest, or if you would just want to share something with us and tell us that we're amazing, we would really appreciate it. And you can email us at alwayswritepodcast@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to get back with you. And for now, I am so thankful for all of our listeners, and I am author Karisa DeLay.
And I am just happy that Karisa does the intros and the outros, so I don't have to.
Outro?
So I'm Jaime Vendera, and we'll see you in the next podcast.
All right. Thanks for listening, and always write.